Hi, everyone. Welcome back to WWW with Daryl Ann. I am welcoming back all my old friends, and some new friends have joined us. So, welcome to you. Happy to be here with you tonight. I am going to continue on with my roller coaster life, as you may recall, as you've been following me and watching me. Uh, and I'm going, before I get back into picking up sort of where I left off, I want to tell you a quick little story. And this story is basically based around this, which is a cocktail called a Manhattan. Now, you may recall that in one of my previous talks, I mentioned that I only have a Manhattan once a week on a Friday night at 5 o'clock. But I missed last night, so I did not have my Manhattan. So it's Saturday, and here it is, and I'm going to take a sip of the perfect Manhattan, which, by the way, is shaken, not stirred. And I'm going to connect this to a story about one of my grandfathers. So I'm going to go way back because, can you imagine, I'm 80 years old and I'm going to talk about my grandfather. So, yeah, we're going back. Not to the horseless carriage, but back. My grandfather, and I'm going to actually tell you his real name because I want to do that. His name was George Washington Murphy, and we affectionately called him GW. GW was a great guy. He had a great life. He was superintendent of all the railroads in the Northeast. A wonderful boss. Everyone adored GW. He lived a long life. He lived well into his 90s. The last years of his life, 10 or so, he lived with his daughter. His wife had passed away. And he lived with his daughter, my aunt. And so GW loved his Manhattans, his cocktail Manhattan, at 5 o'clock every day. And my aunt knew how to make the perfect Manhattan for Dad at 5 o'clock. So at 5 o'clock, his bell would ring, and my aunt would know Dad was ready for his Manhattan. But my aunt, all the while, really just thought that she thought that Dad was just having his one Manhattan. Okay. So she made his Manhattan, brought it up on the tray. Here, Dad. Thank you, honey. And he drank that Manhattan. He savored it for about an hour. Because at 6 o'clock, you know what happened? My aunt's son, my cousin Tim, instinctively knew that his grandfather wanted another Manhattan. Okay? And so Tim, at the age of 11 and 12, etc., knew how to make the perfect Manhattan. So he would kind of wander off into what was then called the butler's pantry, a separate little kitchen. And he would make his grandfather the perfect Manhattan and bring it up without his mother knowing to his grandfather at 6 o'clock. And they got a quarter. A quarter. Hey, back in those days, that was pretty darn good. He got a quarter. And for all those years that my grandfather was alive, for maybe, I'm thinking 5 or 6 years later, Tim was still making his Manhattans. Okay. When my grandfather passed away, the big joke of the family was, of course my aunt knew that he was having another Manhattan at 6 o'clock. Of course she knew that her son was making the Manhattan. So my cousin, all these years later, says, can you imagine? At that age, I was making the perfect Manhattan. So I drink this for my grandfather's sake, for GW. And every time I drink it, I say, toast to you, GW. Yeah, it's true. Oh, true. Okay, so let's go back to where I was when we last met. And I talked about the roller coaster and the ups and the downs of life, and the fact that I did have certainly what could be described as much more than a down. It was a devastating loss. I told you about my late husband, my first and late husband, who had unfortunately died at the age of 36. And I was 35 at the time. So, as I mentioned, it was, a horrible, horrible, devastating thing for me and certainly for my kids. My heart broke for my kids. Actually, more than it broke for mine, actually. And so we carried on. Difficult, difficult days, hard days. We had a big house. We had that big St. Bernard dog, you may remember. And there was a lot to do, a lot to do. You know, the kids went back to school after the summer, and life sort of went on. And it did. We stumbled along for a while. We sort of got our footing. And after about a year and a half, my friends all thought, you know, Daryl, you're young. You got these three kids. You got this big house. Maybe you should start thinking about dating again. I was, of course, reluctant, but I was pushed by very good friends of mine who said, we know a great guy. We just want you to meet him, just to go out to dinner, just to have a companion, nothing serious, nothing serious. And so I reluctantly agreed, well, okay, I guess I will do that. I guess I would do that. My sisters and I, we talked it over, and they thought, you know, good idea, good idea. So they fixed me up with this guy, and I'm going to call him Keith. I will. That is a made up first name and a made up last name, Keith Helman. Okay, I I agreed to meet Keith Helman, and so I was a complete and total nervous wreck. I was, should I do this? No. Should I cancel? Mm-mm. But I decided to do it. So the night came when Keith came to my door. Now, you've got to remember, back then, there was no issue of problem with privacy or someone actually coming to your house. You know, no one was suspicious. There was nothing going on like today. There was so much trust, so much trust. We never thought about that being a problem. So I always remember, you know, first impressions, right? First impressions. Remember that I'm going to tell you to listen to your first impressions. That's my bit of wisdom here. Opened the door, and he was standing there. And my first impression was, oh, he, everything is dark about him. He had dark clothes. He was, had a very sort of a tan face. He had very dark hair. He had a dark mustache. Uh, and everything was like, oh, oh. And he kind of had a look about him. He was, you know, a very, you know, he was a nice looking man. But he had kind of a, almost like a scowl until I opened the door, and then his face sort of lit up. Oh, hi, hi, I'm Keith. Oh, hi, hi, come on in. Okay. So, all right, we, you know, introduced him to the kids and to the St. Bernard dog, and off we went on our first date. First date. Remember, I was very, very young when I met Bob, and it was very awkward for me. We went to a restaurant, and we walked in, and we sat at the bar for a drink. And as soon as we sat at the bar, I immediately started to cry. I cried and cried and cried. So he was very understanding. I said, I have to go to the ladies' room, where I cried and cried and cried. Came out and said, I can't, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I'm sorry. Understood, he said, I understand. This is really hard for you. And he said, let's go. No problem. And he took me home. And I said, I really don't, I don't really know about this. And he said, well, let's give it a couple of weeks. Give it a couple of weeks. And, you know, let's see how you feel in a couple of weeks. Okay, you know, I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I didn't want to, you know. So I said, okay. So then, of course, I told my sisters and my friends, and they were like, well, Daryl, he was understanding, I think you owe him, and yourself, more importantly, another try. So I said, okay, all right. So a couple weeks later, he certainly was persistent, which I came to find out, very persistent. I said, okay. So the second time, I only cried a little bit. And by the third time, I don't think I cried. So very, very understanding man. And we sort of, started to date more frequently. He was very, very nice to the kids, and things started to go along a little bit, I guess. Um, so our friendship, our relationship, took off a little. We would do things. He would come for dinner, and he would, take the kids out for ice cream. Now, I do want to mention that he was divorced and had three kids. So three kids wanted to meet my three kids. And interestingly enough, if you remember that old television show, The Brady Bunch, the Brady Bunch had a mixed bunch of kids, hers and his, and there were two older boys and two younger girls, same as me. Well, wow, gee, what a similarity! We could be the Brady Bunch. Okay, so I have an awful, awful, awful lot to tell you about that relationship and how it went on, what ultimately happened. You're going to hear this amazing story about what ultimately happened, and many more stories about Keith Helman from then on. But that's going to take me a lot of time, folks. You're going to have to really be subscribing to me, listening to me, watching me, and you're not going to believe the stories that I'm going to tell you about the future next years with Keith Helman. And I really want to tell you because after all these years, we have had many, 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 many laughs over what happened during those years. So I'm going to close now tonight. Don't want to bore you too much. Going to close now tonight and just want to wish you all a really, really good weekend and want you all to please be safe. You know, vaccines are here. Okay, everybody, we're seeing some hope. Spring is coming. And I want you all to look forward to happier times. And I want to close by saying what I usually close with, if I don't forget that is, which is remember in life, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Okay, guys, good night.